Hello, everyone. I'm really pleased to welcome you to the launch of Up Project's latest digital commission, Welcome to BioNet, by artist and filmmaker Shu Lea Cheang. I'm Lily Max Hager, Up Project's digital commissions and events producer. I'm a white woman with shoulder-length brown hair, and I'm wearing a black turtleneck and some red lipstick. I go by the pronouns she, her. Welcome to the BioNet has been commissioned for This is Public Space, Up Project's digital commissioning program that invites artists to consider the online realm as a space for public art, and create space to investigate how we navigate between online and physical worlds, exploring the impact of digital media on our relationship between people and places. I was delighted and of course also intrigued when Shu Lea Cheang agreed to produce a digital commission for This is Public Space. Shu Lea Cheang is an artist and filmmaker whose work aims to re-envision genders and genres and operating structures. Her genre-bending, gender-hacking art practices challenge the existing operating mechanisms and the imposed boundaries of society, geography, politics, and economic structures. As an artist known for the ways in which she reconnects technologies with their political history and social agency, the prospect of her doing so whilst returning to the net art format that she has been known for since the 1990s really excited me. Today, we are thrilled to launch Welcome to BioNet, a new digital science fiction experience that situates you in a world saturated by waste, corporate power, and digital systems, where the biological, technical, and sexual are deeply interwoven. The work is grounded in UKI, Shu Lea Cheang's ongoing alt-reality cinema, which she will explain more about later. This new digital commission invites you, the audience, to join BioNet, interact with others, consolidate networks, and enhance personal e-data. Challenging users to think critically about the data we give away each day online, this work raises awareness about the lengths we're prepared to go in order to reach ultimate satisfaction. Are you ready to join us? How far are you willing to go? Will you make it to the climax? Along Shu Lea Cheang, we are joined by Matthew Fuller, who is a professor of cultural studies at Goldsmiths, University of London, and is also a long-term collaborator of Shu Lea's. With Shu Lea Cheang, he has recently been working on the Sleep series, a series of events of art by sleepers, art for sleepers, and art as sleep, and has participated in a number of Shu Lea's projects over the past 2 decades. Tonight's event will be kicked off by a presentation by Shu Lea Cheang, followed by an in-conversation by her and Matthew, and a live play of the work where you get to experience Welcome to BioNet yourselves. I'm now going to hand over to Shu Lea and Matthew, who will introduce Welcome to BioNet and the wider alternative reality in which it is situated. Matthew, over to you.
Thanks very much, Lily. So I wanted to start off with kind of a brief overview of Shu Lea's work, and really just to kind of give some context. Shu Lea started working on the internet in the late 1990s or mid 1990s with a project called Digital Nomad, where she was traveling around the world in various guises, taking part in the internet in a very in a way that took on the question of infrastructure and the personal, in a way that in a sense sets up some of the projects, the concerns of this project. But she also had always at the core of her work this question of sex, of power, and of piracy, of the illicit and the authoritative, and the question of desire and the construction of desire in technology at the core of her work. So some of these other early projects included the very kind of well-known landmark project Brandon that showed at the Guggenheim, New York, Waag in Amsterdam, and Lux in London, as well as series such as Locker Baby series of projects, and many projects that also work in collaboration with other artists and curators, for instance, Kingdom of Piracy with Armin Medosh and Yukiko Shikata. A number of projects throughout this century that have worked on the question of the relationship between the network and ecology. For instance, working with different formations of composting, and also the questions of mushroom networks and mycelium networks. But also one of the things that we'll address in this question, in this session, is really this form of real-time science fiction, or science fiction that is a lived experience rather than something you interact with as a consumer. Shu Lea notably Recently was the artist selected for the Taiwan Pavilion in the 2019 Venice Biennale, in which she reused the main prison of central Venice, the Renaissance prison in which Casanova was held, in order to restage some dramas around historical and contemporary prisoners of sexual politics. Along with this work, Shu Lea has also directed several feature films: Fresh Kills, which is an eco-thriller; IKU, a pornography, science fiction, cyber-feminist film; Fluid Zero, very recently, an interesting film that shares a lot of thematics with the current project around illicit trades in data, in sexual products, in experience. And we're interested in this kind of way in which a lot of her work steps a few seconds into the future in order to draw out some important points about the present. And I hope you'll join us in discussion to find out more about this. But first of all, what I wanted to do was to invite Shu Lea to kind of talk us through some of her work as the background to this project, and then we'll go through Welcome to BioNet. Okay, so Shu Lea, over to you.
Thank you, Matthew, for the introduction. Today maybe I want to just focus on Yuki, the cinema that I've been working on. One of the things is the Yuki cinema. Let me see if I can share some of the image that I will be showing. Oh, just a second. Sorry. I was gonna see. Can't seem to get to the full screen, right? Can you see the screen sharing?
Yeah, we can see screen sharing, but not full screen.
Right, exactly. Okay, maybe this will work. Okay, this should work.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So Yuki is, at the moment, I call it a sci-fi viral or reality cinema. This is a project I have been developing since 2009. First started at Hanga Media Lab in Barcelona. At that time, I had never thought that I could really develop the film into a feature-length film. Due to, I think, the concept, the amount of funding I would have to raise for such a crazy concept. So I started developing more like as a live performance, a live cinema performance. I developed it into a game. What I would call, eventually, I would call those performance and game as a viral performance and viral game, which kind of developed and performing, traveling as a performance and as a game throughout 2009 to 2016, and actually was showcased in quite a very different festivals, different venue, museum, different project space and all that. Basically, it has quite a story to tell, but Yuki basically is a sequel to my 2000 film called IKU, which was shot in Japan, Tokyo, and premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2000. So basically, Yuki proposed the IKU is involved with the eco coders, which is more of an orgasm coder sent out by the dispatch by the Genom Corporation to collect human orgasm data. And it's also a kind of takeoff on Blade Runner. And so in IKU, when the eco coders data hard drive for the human orgasm data is filled, the data got downloaded and the ecocoder are considered to be a piece of e-trash, sort of redundant, and to be discarded into the e-trash bill. So for Yuki, the story kind of stopped there, how the ecocoder will dump on the e-trash bill, and from there, the ecocoder kind of attempt to reprogram herself, and in the process of meeting all these e-trash bill residents, and that here comes the whole story on the e-trash bill. At the same time, the Genom Corporation also retreat from the internet and started BioNet. And the BioNet is actually built inside human body that connect red blood cells. So the story in this way, so in terms of the Yuki as a multi-thread plot unfolded in each trash bill, the red blood cell and infectivity, and well, it had to go into a sci-fi fable with defunct humanoids, transmutants, and techno data body. Since 2020, actually since 2017, I connected with producer Isabel Alver, and we got a grant from DCLAM, CNC, which is a French funding for more of innovative media production. So the project started with building this e-trash bill, building these, in the beginning, I think I was more focused on building this e-trash bill where RACO was dumped, and then from here we meet the transmutant. By 2020, I was more in shape to conceive it as a full-length science fiction film. At the same time, 2020 started the lockdown, so the whole film script as a science fiction feature film script actually written during the lockdown in Paris. So I bring back many different plots, including an infected city, which I would be shooting this part of the film in Berlin next March. The infected city, I think I'm gonna borrow the Harper's particular scenery, like for example, the diner, to stage the infected city. Anyway, the plot sort of developing at the moment with the e-trash bill, many characters with the BioNet, where the Genom Corporation takes human body hostage and using the red blood cells to regenerate orgasm data, to regenerate the DNA, sort of alter DNA, and there's a lot of kind of bioengineering scientists involved. I would see how far we can get. Starting from 2017, I started building this e-trash bill with Matthew Magellan based in Paris. So we built this sort of scenery of using many electronic parts. I will show quickly. Oh, sorry. I think I will show quickly the e-trash bill scenery, where we hope that eventually 60% of the film should be happening at this e-trash bill, as you can see. Of course, the film, what happened, the continent, you know, mainly I think I'm referring to Africa particularly. In 2015, I actually did a trip to Nigeria and research into the electronic e-trash dump at Nigeria, for example. Actually, the trip also took me to China and England. So study the management of the e-trash bill, you know, how much we have generated the e-trash bill. Yeah. So just a very brief introduction. Of course, for the e-trash bill, we would start building different tribes. We were also building different characters living here. These are what I call the those inhabitants. This include various tribes that, again, starting August this year, I start building a lot of these avatars with the designer Roland Roth, who is based in Berlin. And so there are actually going to be 22 avatars we have to bring together, and they all belong to different tribes. They all sort of interact with Reiko in the process for Reiko trying to reprogram herself. So these are the habitants on the e-trash bill are really gender fluid human, non-human, nerds, geeks, transmutants, symbionts, microbes, and variants. I won't get into all these different characters. Of course, there is a narrative, there is a plot along with all these characters. Basically, they live off the e-trash. As for this character, one of the characters in the film, Ek, is one of the cosmonauts, and you can see that she makes up her clothing with the broken hard drive. We have this Haro character who actually make up her clothes, their clothes with keys, keyboards. We also, what do we have? These are the laboros, the laborers, the most sort of lower class in the tribe at the e-trash bill. So again, various tribes make up the e-trash bill this way. It's really, I'm showing that for the first time, these work in progress. Actually, these avatars are still totally under development and have never shown. So this is the first time I dare to present it in its most raw form. It's gonna be a long process to make this film. There's gonna be creating the characters. We're gonna have to do the motion capture. Everything is done with the Unity engine, the software, and so that this process is actually a long process. At the same time, what's happening with the Genome's BioNet? Again, this is the premises of the Genome's BioNet is how genome actually is able to create a bacteria that could be inserted into the human body, and the bacteria carry the orgasm data DNA. So in this way, that is able to infiltrate the body and alter the red blood cell function. So the red blood cells embedded with embedded with this orgasm data is actually able to cell generate orgasm for the human. So imagine a world that you basically can cell generate. We are not talking about masturbation at all. We are talking about sort of data regenerated orgasm. However, genome is also, there is a purpose for this. Once you can cell generate the data, you kind of feel, you think you should be self-fulfilled, but there is a need for human, as we have the need to go through the social network, to actually need in the exchange of the data. We need the exchange of the data. We want to get in touch with other people through, in this case, through the handshake, that we can exchange the data. However, it is through this exchange, the Genome Corporation can actually collect, harvest your data. And for you, the way of exchange data, of course, there's kind of enhancement of your pleasure. In 2020, I got a commission also from Rhizome to do Rhizome is Rhizome.org is an online magazine based in New York, and they have a series called 7x7, which is mostly focused on artists and scientists collaboration. So at that time, I was working with a scientist in Minneapolis University, and we actually have a series of dialogue and create these, at the end, I create this video piece that sort of talk about the scientists, how the bioscientists in creating these kind of different scenario for exchange of the data. I will show this 3 minutes video. Yeah. Yeah, so that's with Kay Amadala from Minneapolis University. I think, yeah, I just want to, it's really a film that I'm in the middle of actually in production at the moment on the eTrashville part. A lot of these sketches, the graphics I'm doing will totally working towards the film narrative at the end. I'm not expecting the film to get released until 2023. So pretty much during this whole period of time that I'm developing, creating at the same time, many of the artwork are being branching out or forking out from the concept of the film in a way, it's a different way of expressing the concept. I think basically because the plot is quite complicated. So for example, welcome to BioNet, this web art commission, allowed me to use this a little web world to test the interface with audience participation. So I'm really looking forward to play with you after this talk is over. Thanks.
Thanks, Shu Lea. I wonder if you could walk us through the Welcome to BioNet a little bit, just give us a sense of what the project is, where it sits in this kind of universe that you've set up.
Yeah, I think welcome to BioNet. At the end, we'll think about the kind of social network we are in, if we join or not join. I think, for example, even for the giant Facebook that we all succumb ourselves to, how many people want to get out of there, want to migrate. Of course, the BioNet Genome Corporation is producing is the result of, for me, is the result of my study of the biotechnology over the years, to understand how the biotech is taking control of, or is not even taking control, is totally altering our body without us knowing it. We are part of a bio network that we sort of succumb our data to, right? So in this way, in the Yuki scenario, we are succumbing our organism data to the BioNet. At the end, what would the genome do is actually making this red pill, which would become the oral drug for instant satisfaction. Of course, my biggest theory is always like the government, the biotech company, always working with pharmaceutical. Pharmaceutical have the control of the market. They can market the red pill, and this is where the money lies, right? Yeah.
So when people go to the website, they get this set of terms and conditions from Genome Corporation, and then there's a set of steps that happens in the project. Could you walk us through those steps, starting with the terms and conditions? What happens in Welcome to BioNet?
Yes, I was hoping that. Are we doing the spoiler? The plus spoiler. No. Okay. I think the design for the website, which I sort of say like it was almost like, for me, I think the project kind of really is a sort of revisit my net art practice more in the 90s. In a way, but it's also, bringing a lot of these social network contract into it. For example, the BioNet, like what we know today, before you sign on to any network, any social network, if you dare to read through all the terms and agreements, I think we are on the net, we are so quick to click on submit, whatever, you don't even know who you submit to. So the BioNet, Welcome to BioNet, actually also have a very long agreement, and I challenge you to read through it before you agree. If you don't agree, you are back to where you're gonna be. So that's a lot of, I think the process of this project is also like really challenge the viewer to say, do you dare to agree? If you don't agree, you are back to zero. You are kicked out, you are excluded. In order to join, you agree. So by the time you agree, what are you giving up, right? On Facebook, we know that we give up every right to our image, to our, whatever words we articulate. So this is actually observance of the current network situation that we are in, the social network situation we are in. Second, that on the Welcome to BioNet, I set up a very simple sort of peer-to-peer joint play to swap the data, and again, it really, at the end, for me, it doesn't matter which kind of data you're swapping, so it's just like people are just exchange any kind of data possible. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think what's also interesting is that the images, the sequences of images move from text and forms to very complex and highly textured computer graphics at different scales, microscopic scales to macroscopic. And there's also these kind of references to different kinds of image formation on the computer. So it's also about the culture of computer graphics. And you mentioned a game engine earlier, and how we're kind of these kind of network structures and the the kind of the vocabulary of 3D graphics has also become something that you can play with in a very interesting way, kind of mixing registers of computer graphics that don't normally sit together. So, okay, so let's think about outside of the kind of the specific BioNet project. Welcome to BioNet. As I kind of sense that you don't want to reveal too much about what will happen to people if they sign up to this product, because you know that they're going to be addicted to your fantastic kind of orgasm delivery service. Span out a bit. What do you mean by this term viral alt reality cinema, and how does it fit into this kind of wider way of constructing a project that's a film, that is art installations, that are experiences? What is happening here?
Yes, so as I say, I always thought that it could be a feature film. However, my focus on writing the feature film script really, when the lockdown began, I was in Paris, so it was a long period of time to go through it, and we all kind of go through the solitude, we go through an empty city. That really sprouts even more imagination in terms of how the script should be constructed. However, the core of the Yuki cinema is always about how the character from IKU, the eco coder named Reiko, how she was dumped on the e-trash wheel, and then from being dumped on the e-trash wheel, she went through this whole process of kind of reawakening, right? Awakening process that which including try to DIY herself or DIWO with others to help her regain a body shape, regain a body function. However, maybe somehow through the process, some sort of miscalculation, she actually turns into a virus. Actually throughout the period also, I think it's also very gender fluid in a way, maybe in the process, she's probably swing between any kind of transmutation process. So by the time she became the virus, of course, is a sort of almost like a agent or revenge or infiltration, So by the time when she became the virus, she can finally infiltrate into the BioNet and mobilize many of the infected people and infiltrate into the BioNet. The ultimate goal is probably to stop the red blood cells computing function, and to regain her own orgasm data. So this is kind of like heroic story of the ending, right? There was also throughout the process of developing, I have always had so much doubt about how are we able to fight back with the corporation takeover. I think this have been kind of key elements in a lot of my work. I think in the beginning, I want to develop a kind of game situation at the end of the film, so involving the audience to play the game, to say, can the virus actually infiltrate the corporation and regain the data, or the corporation finally wins the game? So this is basically at the time when we are witnessing the pandemic, the COVID-19, it really proved to be, you had too many elements involved by that time. You have the vaccine, you have so many companies involved, you have the different vaccine company, some work, some doesn't work. There's also, for me, there's a lot of intricacy in that. I think during the pandemic, I also read a lot of sort of, you sort of rely on, refer to many philosophers who can kind of take you out of this, or sort of help you analyze the situation. One of the reading about, like, is the virus being the portal? Can we actually get into the next world through the virus? These kind of questions. And of course, what made me realize, especially during the kind of supply, the demand and supply of the vaccine solution, you realize that you and I don't live in the same bioreality. So if we talk about the global situation, it's like, oh, we all have the plague, the pandemic. However, the class, the race, the economic situation, political situation, all affecting the supply chain of the vaccine. That means then who gets the vaccine, who doesn't get the vaccine. At the end, we got the mutants also. We got the mutation, we got the variants, so the story never ends, right? So we are still living in the midst of this. And for me, I think these particular reality really affect the script I'm writing. And I have several times went into doubt or certain kind of depression because I couldn't walk myself through the plot. I am still working on the film script at the same time we are in production, because it's like there's so many different development, parallel, triple development, that somehow I have to figure out how to merge them together if I can find a way. And I think, thank you, Matthew, throughout the process, you are always the big advisor for me, helping me, kind of script consulting me.
Yeah, thanks. I should say to everyone here that we're also open to questions. If you want to put anything in the chat, we're very happy to have questions from the audience. Yeah. And there's one question from an anonymous attendee, which says, what role does science fiction play in your work? And have you always situated your work in alternative realities?
Actually, the particular word or reality, I have actually tried to distinguish myself from virtual reality. I have been sort of rejecting working on a virtual reality project, but I want to particularly say, when I say alt reality rather than alternative reality, again, I make a difference. For me, alt also, it's like one of the keys, right? One of the keys on your keyboard. So there is a very different sense of all reality as opposed to virtual reality or alternative reality, in terms that what the viral all reality also may be meaning something else. Actually, the film in the beginning, at one point, I want to make it, I was having a subtitle called Interrupted Cinema. I'm willing to stop the cinema, the narrative flow at any time, just so that we can talk things through, right? So that's the kind of way of, at the moment, I feel more like the film actually take you to this trajectory of Reiko's journey through the e-trash spill, takes you through BioNet's journey through the blood vessel. So these are the a very science fiction approach. Of course, for my film, I think since 2000, I pretty much got into science fiction film with IKU. And since then, I do feel it sort of is the only way I can tell many stories at the moment. But at the same time, I think science fiction is probably more reality than we can live in, right?
Yeah, I mean, and a related question from Ulrika Hager, who asked, how far would you go with this? What if a biotech company would like to take this into reality?
Yes, throughout the research period, I actually was at this biolab this was actually the biolab in Barcelona, and there's like 1,000 biotechnologists working in this biolab, and I was particularly research into cell and synthetic biotechnology, and I proposed this scenario, to all the scientists. Well, they kind of been entertained, and they actually do think about it seriously and think it is possible. And I think this idea of the biotech company want to make the drug and the web data is changed, the kind of blockchain way of harvesting, mining, it's all happening. I do not think it's so far away from the reality.
Great. No, I think that it could be it could be the next epidemic. Could actually be a feature film. Who knows? The next question is, the graphics of your films are incredible. How do you develop these characters?
Okay. I do have a script with all the character description, what they dress like, what they act like, but at the same time, I'm working with this very young queer guy, Roland, and of course, we went through a different process of developing. There's many references. Almost all my characters have different references. We are actually trying out also mixing the real performers with the avatar. So some of the avatars are totally created in the vault, and some of the avatars gonna be working with the real performers. We did a sort of motion capture performance 3 weeks ago at Shekhalet, and kind of presenting the sort of behind the scene motion capture, and also do the casting, find a few really great performers, which we hope to who we hope to continue working with. As I say, it's just a very long process of creating these characters, and but they all fit a very certain function in the script. The script does involve each character to be engaging in one way or the other with Reiko, the character, and contributing to her becoming Yuki, the virus.
Another question is it significant that you've returned to net art with Welcome to BioNet?
Yes, I think in the 90s, because of with the Brandon, so I kind of sometimes been held as a net art pioneer. Of course, Brandon at the time as a one-year project, a one-year narrative project on the web, and being a Guggenheim Museum commission and collection. And so that really marks a very sort of my kind of net art venture. And at the time with Brandon, I always think the net art should be developed into episodic, so then the idea for 1 year that you can input different episode, you can input different story, you can input different interface. All the interface should become open interface. You can invite the public and all other artists to collaborate. With the I still did quite a few smaller web art projects, for example, composing the net, these kind of work. But officially, in a certain way, this piece is really a lot about the interaction with the viewer. I'm imagining that there is a public out there, and it is probably particularly popular because it's a commission from our project, and it's called this, and it's particularly for the series called This Is Public Space. So which I really want to challenge myself to do, to return to the web art, but do a piece that really working with the public, and particularly in this case, updating myself to deal with the issues of social network, the issues of data exchange, data ownership, the big data, the data mining, all these particular issue. I've been struggling myself with many of my work over the last few years. Yeah.
And there's another question that follows up in a way. What's the one thing you'd like people to take away from this new work? Obviously, apart from a Yuki virus.
That's a serious question. How do you take away? You should be able to take away a red pill, I hope. maybe in this case, before it get produced, you can take away a virtual red pill, and I hope that you get to simply swallow it and enjoy it.
And yeah, a couple of questions that are kind of linked. One is, are you afraid of censorship? And another one, thank you for a really interesting presentation. Can I ask if you are positive about the future?
I'm not afraid of censorship, but I'm constantly dealing with censorship. A lot of my work, for example, the Fluidity, my 2017 feature film, before it got made into a feature film, I also make a lot of performance with that word, that concept. And I think I got censored in 3 different cities, including Berlin, Montreal, and Kristiansand in Norway. A lot of my work carry the warning sign, the warning as to, I think 3x6 in Venice also carry a warning sign. But with the curator Pobi Preciado, we are very careful not to use the age as the warning sign. We always say this work is for mature audience. So we have a lot of precaution these days in order not to get shut down. So I think my work probably is challenged that particular nerve, that particular border, but I'm not afraid of censorship. I have no problem being shut down. Yeah, it's okay. As to what's the next question about the future?
Yeah, what are your feelings about the future?
Oh, the future has passed us already. The future has passed us, and we are trying to catch up with so many things. I think, maybe we live the future, and at this particular point, I think it's more about we really are talking about a lot of catch up to do. A lot of catch up with ourselves. Regenerating ourselves, how do we actually I have this other project about the farm. It's all about regeneration and recovery. However, this again needs a community to come together to do it, so again, as I say, welcome to BioNet is really a testing ground to see how I can involve the public to join. Again, a major part of the welcome to BioNet involve a play field, and you really have to play with people. If you're alone there is nothing for you to do. So you actually have to be accidentally if someone also there. And that is why we are organizing a play together. So make sure we all join together so we can play together. So again, this is a test to see how we together can have this community. But I think the welcome to BioNet, of course, is very cynical as to saying like, submit yourself to BioNet, right?
Yeah, but you also have this function of, the e-trashscape, which has all these kind of resistant communities, different kind of collectives,
exactly. Yeah.
living in there. And I think your claim that the future's already happened, and we're living in the e-trashscape generated by different versions of the future or different images of the future, and we have to kind of pull together some other kind of future is absolutely core to the film and this wider project.
Right, exactly.
So there's a little bit more time left. We've got until 8. There's a couple more questions. One is, if we ever have the red pill, will it turn us into the most unsocial people ever?
Maybe not. Maybe you start doing a lot of rape and have a red pill party.
Okay.
I think rape is totally back, right? Everybody's doing rape, so with rape, it's just like gonna replace ecstasy pill. So you start taking red pill, that's probably gonna be developed into a different drug. So of course, we have to be reminded of the reference of the red pill or blue pill, which pill you want to take, right? From the Matrix movie, yeah.
Yeah, certainly in London, the revival of rave with the super clubs being back, they're too expensive to go to, so everyone's in the deserted factories, the e-trashscape of the present,
Yes.
and the periphery of the city. That's for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So another question, can you talk a bit more about the role of collaboration in your work? Do you consult with scientists? I mean, you mentioned this a little bit, but maybe talk about the way in which you've talked with different groups of scientists in New
Yes.
York with Rhizome and in Hangar in Barcelona, for instance.
Yes. This is actually very intense, and I welcome this kind of opportunity. Of course, at the moment, there is a kind of trend in the scene called the artist and scientist collaboration, right? So for me, I am, at the same time, I guess when I talk about science fiction, it's almost like it's two terms, right? You have science and you have fiction. Yeah. So which is more scientific in a way. So when I go to visit the lab, the bio lab in Barcelona, or I have a very remote section working with Kate in Minneapolis, it is a very intense working relationship. We were, this was happening. Like, for example, working with Kate in Minneapolis happened during last year, during lockdown, on both sides. And so it's just more like a very virtual exchange, but at the same time, I guess all the time I'm proposing a different scenario. The scenario I propose will be so far out, and I almost need the scientists to tell me, say, do you think there is possible such a scenario? And so that's this kind of discussion. And by chance, like for example, Kay also is she loves science fiction, so she actually really got into it. So she helped me write a lot of these dialogue you heard on that video, because so we kind of imagine that four scientists is changing the idea of how to build a BioNet, how to make people involved, but at the same time, how the glitch that can happen, and I think glitch is also glitch is like the virus, they all very beautiful thing. So with a glitch happen, then, we could be creating a kind of gender neutral species, and this is what's happening a lot of time. And of course, I also refer to many biotechnology, bio artists, there's also been a really sprouting field of development with many bio artists doing DIY work, experimenting on own body with transgenes, transplanting. And so all these are very interesting for me to see. It's more like how artists are also pushing this boundary as to even using their body as the testing ground. So combining with the artists working with these DIY biofuel, and the scientists kind of in the closet, a lot of these research is actually not open to the public. It's more like, you never know how far has been developed, in terms of cell technology, in terms of we are not talking about chips anymore. We are talking about totally alter the body composition, right? So these are very, very real. And, it's totally very real. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's a few more questions, and one of them is around NFTs. Is there a possibility to produce, or would you like to produce NFT red pills?
Yeah.
If you want to produce an ecological disaster, what better way to bring your kind of film scenario into reality?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think it's I think the film, have a lot of plot actually totally taken from many experiments. For example, I decided to write a scene about the way the Gano Corporation infiltrate human body, how the bacteria infiltrate human body is through the red rain, is through the raining down of the rain in color red. However, this is also referred to many of the military experiments of bacteria experiment during the 1950s or 30s through 50s, using the Navy airplane would be flying to the air and raining down different bacteria, right? So as a kind of chemical weapon. So these are all happening totally, yeah. So yes, there are many different possibilities in the scenario to refer to many of these scientific biological development that I would pose question to, right? So for the process is really about what if something went wrong or something already gone wrong, that kind of question. So that's what I mean. The glitch is becoming more in the center of the scene.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the glitch is something that's quite distinct to identity. And there's another question about identity and the use of identity, or let's say the way different kind of identity formation structures and systems work in your work as a whole. What's your relation? I mean, you've have a strong kind of engagement with queer filmmaking, queer aesthetics, but also multiple others. Perhaps you could say a little about that and how it plays out in this current project, and then we've got one more question after that.
I pretty much feel gender fluidity is a key to kind of I don't particularly feel any person should fix into a fixed gender identity. Of course, I can see there is another trend that people are eager to identify themselves as kind of gender affirmation, he, she, they, so there is these kind of maybe some of them, of course, is political or sexual or physical or political, but the eagerness to fix yourself with a gender affirmation, it's kind of surprising for me. So the film, all the avatar I'm creating, they all against the stereotypical 3D construction. So I have a character whose body shape keep changing. I have a character who redraw themselves into various forms. So there is no fixed identity in these people. I would probably need to call every character I'm creating they rather than he or she. Even for Reiko, throughout the film, I think Reiko also changed quite a, sort of went through quite a lot of gender change, identity change. There's going to be a lot of sort of different formation of their bodies. So this is all, for me to open this up is very important. And of course, then it become a point of discussion or departure to bring up discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very much a question of a zone of experiment as well as a zone of political struggle that's kind of played out in your work. And I guess this leads possibly on to the last question, which is who inspires you? Like who is who is there that is kind of making you think, yes, that's someone thrilling who generates great ideas?
Interesting. Whenever I got asked this question, it always I always got puzzled because I don't know exactly how to answer this question. I don't have a particularly one figure, right? I feel like I am part of a larger community, media community, queer community, artist community, film community that all working in different way, making works that express idea, political, social, in different ways. So I feel I am probably promoted by many of my colleagues, and they inspire me. They push me forward. I want to have my work be seen by general public, by the peers, and the reaction. Because you have to understand, as a media artist, we don't get many reviews. We don't sell our work. So the only way we finally can affirm our own existence maybe by the peer recognition, right? Yeah.
Okay, so there's one question that Lily's going to put through to the microphone from Joanna.
Yeah.
You should be able to speak now, Joanna.
You've got your mic, you're muted on the mic. That's it. I think you've switched the mute back on. Okay. That looks good. Do you want to go ahead? Okay, that's not coming through. Maybe you could use the Q&A function on the chat. I think maybe you've got an issue with the mic. Yeah, so I mean, just before, while Joanna's typing that question in, Shu Lea, if you talk about this kind of peer recognition, if people are interested in your work, where else should they look? Who are the peers you're in dialogue with? An awful question to ask in some ways. So you're muted as well.
What do you mean by where should they look?
Where should they look? Where, what are the kind of the inspirations? If people wanted to know the kind of the inspiring peers, who are you in dialogue with?
Yes, see, this is the thing, I have a very stupid website called moveccontact.info, which basically lists all my connection or my kind of agenda every month, and which actually link to many interesting projects that I'm involved with. I can type it here, it's Moveccontact. Yeah. And so in that case, that's probably the best reference I can give, and because it's sort of, I try to keep it updated with various things that I'm involved with, right? So.
Okay, no, I think that's good. We're going to, I think, now move to the live play of the website.
Lily, maybe want to wrap it up? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shu Lea and Matthew, for such an insightful conversation. So as they both already said, we're now really excited to head over to the live play, which you can access via the link in the chat. And Jack, our tech support, is just going to pop that in the chat for you. But before that, I would really like to thank our audience, so you guys, for participating and for all your comments and questions you've shared, which have informed the discussion tonight. Please also do share any feedback you have with us. You will see that our tech support will also share a link to a questionnaire, which we would be really grateful for you to complete before you leave. We will also be uploading a recording of today's event on Up Project's YouTube channel and website, which will include captions if you do want to re-watch the event. But before we head over to the live play, I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Arts Council England for generously supporting this event and our ongoing This is Public Space program. And last, but by no means least, I would also like to thank Jack Newbury, Up Project's project assistant, for providing technical support this evening. So do remember to join us for the live play and head to the link in the chat. And thank you all for attending this evening. See you in the BioNet.
Hold on. I just want to say, if you can kind of go through the BioNet, we actually open up a Telegram to check. You have that link also on Telegram. We have a group called Welcome to BioNet. And also just make sure it's not a very simple website in a way to navigate through. At some point you may get stuck, and I'd like to see if you actually reach the credit page, which Arts Council London support, Arts Council England support is acknowledged. So I hope that you do reach the credit page and that would be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. See you there. The Telegram link is now also in the chat.